your part in the system. And I wanted to do a little bit of teaching tonight, a little bit of sharing of information. And then I certainly wanted to answer questions tonight. This evening's topic is a topic that is not specifically used for uh, how you deal with a toxic or malignant type of narcissist. Um, Tonight is talking about the more normal relationships in our lives. Those of us have a few of those, I hope. Um, and the principles apply to even very painful and negative relationships, but I'm primarily talking about family of origin, friends, partners, spouses. That's what I'm going to be addressing this evening. And the reason I do that is for one reason is that if you have a narcissist you're dealing with, or you have a narcissistic partner, you have a narcissistic mother in law, you have a narcissistic relationship that you're struggling with, that's a process that I think we want to do what I call going outward versus going inward. Tonight's a going inward topic. And and what I mean by the two of those, by each of those, is going outward is what do I need to do to keep myself safe, to end a relationship, to go no contact with a narcissist. And I just realized I have something in my eye here real quick. Um, and and also, if we're dealing with a very toxic relationship, I think for most of us, we probably want to be real careful about how we get into our feelings in dealing with them directly. I like to deal with the externals of the relationship, going outward, because going inward is the process of looking at your feelings. How are you reacting? How are you being triggered? And those kinds of things. But triggering and feelings and emotional processing is not safe to do with a narcissist. You don't tell them, oh, I'm feeling really hurt right now, and that hurt is da 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 da. The narcissist is just going to use that against you if they're a narcissist and they are malignant or even covert, or they're going to use that against you. So what I kind of train or help people to understand is dealing with the narcissist and very unhealthy, highly charged relationships. We want to kind of stay up here in our head, and we want to think and we want to observe. That's what I mean by going outward. Going inward is then we begin to understand our reactivity, understand our triggers, but you don't want to do that while you're interacting with the narcissist in the present moment, in situ, right where it's happening. And I think too many of us do that. Those who have a relationship with a narcissist, we tend to do too much going inward and not enough going outward in terms of the structure of the relationship. And what I want to do is help people to flip that and go inward when we're away from the narcissist, going outward when we're with the narcissist. Setting boundaries, being firmer on boundaries is again an outward type of emotional state or thinking state. Whereas going inward, we're processing our reactivity. Because you don't, hey, my narcissist spouse, I want to tell you that I'm feeling real triggered not right now and not feeling very loved, and I feel hurt, and I feel, how far are you going to get with that with a narcissist? I don't know how far you're going to get in doing that inward processing with a narcissist, or with a borderline, or with sociopath, or with your cluster B type of relationship. You're not going to get very far doing that, and I don't advise people to do that. Now, when you're all alone, you can do that inward, going inward. But when you're actually engaging with someone who's toxic, you really need to stay focused, thinking, observing, external boundaries, and those kinds of things. That's the going outward. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit about how I think about dealing with difficult folks. Tonight's a more of a going inward uh, topic, and it has to do with kind of thinking systems and how we interact in our system. What is our part in the what part do we play within the system? Because even with a narcissist, we still play a part of in that interaction with them. It is a loop that we do, but I wouldn't advise you sorting that all out with the narcissist. I just would not advise you to do that. That needs to be done separately with a coach or a therapist or a friend or away from the relationship itself, because narcissists tend to capitalize on us being more inwardly focused, and they take great advantage of that. We're the impasse, or we're codependent, or we are much maybe more aware of our feelings, or our feelings get too hypercharged and then we're reactive. Well, of course, a narcissist will, really make hay out of that. And so that's why I, again, recommend people not go inward when they're in the situation with a narcissist. Think outwardly what you need to do to set up that structure and boundaries, and what you need to do for your life. Should I stay? Should I go? What do I need to do to be safe and to be healthy? And that's more of a going outward process. Even thinking about getting a divorce is an outward process. Certainly, it affects us internally, of course, and we will have feelings about that. But if you have a narcissistic spouse you're divorcing, I wouldn't say, oh, I need to go and tell them all the reasons why I'm leaving them, how hurt I felt, how rejected I felt, how, it's just not going to work well. And they really don't care. And they will only use that to their benefit. So I hope that is a help in understanding the way I view those two processes. So this would also be a part of, how we interact with that difficult sister, the difficult dad, and again, who may not be the cluster B, because cluster B, you have a whole different set of rules that go with that. And I think that's, I'd love to see someone write a book. Maybe I should. I don't know. I don't know if I can. But the rules for interacting with a narcissist or a cluster B, and then the rules for interacting with more normal, neurotic, good old neurotic people who just have their own issues, who just may be reactive, but they're not personality disordered, so to speak. And I think those are two different sets of rules that we would have. Much like when I remember working in a psychiatric practice, and we would people would be hospitalized, people would be outpatient, inpatient, and we would work with different types of mental health issues. Well, the rules for dealing with a paranoid schizophrenic are quite different rules than you would deal with someone who just grew up in an unhealthy home and has some depression. You would deal with them differently and relate to them differently. So you have to be able to have in your toolbox an ability to shift what tools you use for a relationship. Let's give an example, say at work, and your supervisor is a narcissist. We can't treat them like a normal supervisor. If they're a narcissist or they have some personality disorder, you're not going to do well if you just treat them straightforwardly like they're normal with a problem. And we would need to use other rules in that. Because sometimes we'll keep trying to, for here's an example of how it might be misused. We'll keep trying to engage them to get some empathy from them for us or for our issues, or how we felt when we felt hurt by them, or disrespected or disregarded, or, and that's not going to be helpful to try to get that from them. It really isn't going to be very helpful to do that, because it's not going to happen. Same way with a parent. Well, I want my dad to know how much he's hurting me right now. Well, if your dad's a narcissist, when is he going to know that? If you're dealing with a supervisor or a parent who's a narcissist, we're going to be wasting our time to try and elicit caring, empathy, them understanding us, and many times we spend a lot of time trying to do that. I know in a narcissistic relationship that I experienced, you just spend hours trying to be heard, days, weeks trying to be heard, trying to be understood, trying to get them to see, it's me doing a task that is impossible. And then I get frustrated, I get more upset. They then also use that information to manipulate me. They use that information because they're always scanning, and I think that's what a narcissist would tend to do, always scanning for where are the buttons, where are the issues. Or say you're a parent and you have a narcissistic child or a narcissistic disordered child, and that again, they're scanning for all of your weaknesses and all of the pain and wounds, and they know them, they will zero in on them. We don't want to offer that up to them. We really don't want to offer that up to them. And I think too many of us do that when we're in relationship with someone who's narcissistic or cluster B. I just need to tell them how I feel. Many times I've said to clients, don't tell them how you feel. Why are you going to do that? Not that we wouldn't do that in normal relationships, but we're not going to do that in this relationship, because it will be used inappropriately, and it will be used to manipulate us and used to tear us down. So we want to be real careful about that when we're doing that vulnerability and sharing with someone who's a narcissist. So again, I'm going to talk about another group of relationships tonight, which are more the neurotic kind of normal relationships we have in our life. Though again, these things do apply to all relationships, because you'll see some of the things I'll share tonight. It's still true for a narcissistic relationship and us. It still applies to us, but we might function in that differently, and I might advise some different things for other people and other relationships like that. Tonight's about thinking family systems, and how relationships work and operate regarding a systems approach. Now, sometimes people say, well, why is that so important, Jerry? Well, and by the way, thank you. You're very welcome for the videos that I put up. Someone was thanking me for those videos. Why is that so important? Why do we care about that? If my parents were abusive or alcoholic or narcissistic, or was, in some ways hurtful to me growing up and mistreated me, isn't that enough to know? Now, I still go to Christmas, Thanksgiving, I still stay in contact with them, and many of us stay in contact with our family members, even those that we don't get along with very much. And certainly you have a right not to. We can exit a family relationship. We can be adopted by friends and leave our family of origin over there. Um, what's the saying? Blood is thicker than water. And then I say, but sometimes I really need the water and not the blood. And I think for many families that's true. And for many people who are in families who have unhealthy families, but many of us are engaged with our family, healthy or not. We do engage with them. We also have friends, partners, religious people in our religious organizations that we go to, and our fellow followers, and work relationships. Actually, all of this applies to work relationships as well, because work is just a different kind of family. All organizations are families, and they operate like families. You know why they operate like families? Um, because they're made up of people. That's why they operate like families. If they weren't people, then they would just be work. But they're people, and they bring their family of origin in them to the workplace. We bring our family of origin in us to the workplace. And then what gets created is a whole new type of family. Interestingly enough, an adult child of an alcoholic ends up in a career and a business where they're working. And guess what? It ends up feeling and expressing itself just like an alcoholic family. And you can see the addicted or alcoholic one. You can see the lost child, the mascot, the golden child, the scapegoat, all those roles that play out in alcoholic families. And you can see it all there at work and see how you fit into that as well. And in fact, I don't know, I might have an example of my own work wise. But work are families, churches are families, PTA clubs, PTO clubs are families, scouting, any organizations that we are a part of become a type of family. And family systems applies to them as well. Why? Because they're just people. Now they have a church has a different aim and goal than IBM or General Motors. I understand that. They're different types of organizations with different aims and goals, but they're still made up of people. And so they're going to be a family, so to speak. So, seeing your part in the system. And also, this is the seventh characteristic of Jenny Brown's book, Growing Yourself Up. And she talks about the 7 characteristics of a mature inner adult. And the 7th one is sees beyond self to patterns of reaction each person is a part of. And I add in the system. So it's looking beyond self to the patterns and what's going on, not just what's being said, not just the argument at hand, but how is the argument a part of a bigger whole? That's seeing in a systems way, if we expand that. Pattern thinking is very helpful in navigating relationships, which I spend all day long with clients, on workshops, on videos, to try to help them understand that pattern thinking is very helpful. If you can see patterns, you have the leverage. You really do. You really are empowered. If you don't see patterns, you'll only see the content, and you will be observationally blind in the relationship. Just like the couple comes in, they've been arguing for weeks or months, and they believe the problem is the argument issues and that we just need to resolve those issues. And they don't see the arguments in a bigger, wider frame to see, oh, maybe our arguments are the way we handle our intimacy, because we have intimacy allergy, we have intimacy problems. an allergy to intimacy, which many of us grew up with, we will then resist. And we may do it by arguing. We may be doing it by giving in and complying. We may do it by codependency. And what happens with intimacy is the two magnets come together, they flip apart. Whenever you bring those two horseshoe magnets together, it flips apart. And the more we come into that intimacy that we want to have, the more we're able to stay in there without flipping and acting out or getting. So as a couple gets closer and they start to feel that tension and they're not used to being intimate, but they're starting to get closer, what do you think will happen? Something will erupt. And so now we have some argument going on, and that keeps us out here and safe. And then we don't experience the intimacy that we want. And then we're saying, oh, well, if you were only this way, we could be like that. And the other partner says, well, if you were only this way, we could be like that. And I'm saying, no, what you're doing together is why you can't do this. And you don't know yourselves, and you don't see the pattern. You don't see the overall system. All relationships are interacting units. Whenever you're in a relationship, and then we can also include the relationship we have with ourselves. Why do you think we do denial? Because I can't be intimate with me. And so I don't have that. I didn't learn that, don't have the ability to be intimate. And so I'll be in denial. And so I will withhold that information from myself. And so that's a relationship we have with ourselves. That's a relationship. All relationships are interacting units. You're always interacting with yourself. And then when you add another person, you're always interacting with other people. And so they are not just static me and static you. This is always moving in a system, that relationship. And the interesting thing is what seems to be an incomprehensible problem in a relationship as it's moving is that what seems to be an incomprehensible problems makes sense when seen in the light of a system approach or systems thinking. Because again, if the relationship is always doing a feedback loop between the two of you all the time, but you don't think that's what's happening and you don't see that, you're going to misstep and you're going to make not as good choices about the relationship and how we interact. We can begin to decode problems with systems thinking. And we tend to do better analyzing the system versus just analyzing the individual. And that was one of the things Murray Bowen and others and other theorists were talking about, that we tend to see more and we can actually analyze things much better, which is what he found when he brought in the schizophrenic families that would be treated. The schizophrenic would come in and be treated. He then brought in the families as well and treated all of them together for weeks or for days, inpatient. And then what does he discover? Instead of just looking at the individual going, oh, well, they're more psychotic. Oh, well, they're less psychotic. Let's give them a little more medicine. Let's take away a little more medicine or whatever we need to do. He began to see that, if the family is healthier, if the family and the patient is more self-differentiated, they're less psychotic. It doesn't cure the illness, but we know there was an impact on that. The more fused the family was and enmeshed, more high anxiety, the more psychotic the patient was. And so they began to see, oh, there's a value in looking at the whole system rather than just the patient. Same is true with our relationships. James Framo, who is an author who wrote back in the 80s, I think, a famous marriage and family therapist, said, in relationships, we carry psychological functions for each other. And actually the quote reads, Whenever two or more persons are in a close relationship, they collude to carry emotional and psychological functions for the other. Whenever we're in a significant or meaningful relationship, we're going to be carrying functions for each other. Now, what do I mean by that? Have you ever had a relationship or where it's kind of complementary or uncomplimentary? Or, for example, if you're scared, I can afford to be brave. If you're carrying and taking the soft line, I can afford to carry the hard line. Guess what happens with parenting and with children? Let's say the husband is, I'll use him because many times we say the wife, but the husband is permissive, doesn't care what the kids do. Guess what mom ends up? Mom's now the heavy. She's got to come in and toe the hard line. Here's the dad who's towing the soft line. They're carrying functions for each other. And we do that often in relationships. Just think about that in your own relationships. Let's talk about overfunctioning. Anybody out there overfunction? I certainly have. Guess what? I'm carrying their function on me and I'm overfunctioning. Then I allow them to underfunction and they're carrying the underfunction I'm refusing in our relationship. And so we're carrying those for each other in the relationship. That's part of systems understanding of those. So carrying the soft line, carrying the hard line. Now let's take a more serious or unconscious, more highly charged example. Might be, I will be your bad self and act out your impulses if you never leave me. Do you hear how we're carrying functions for one another? You don't leave me and I'll act out your bad parts. And I'm going to give you an example of that here in a minute. We're going to talk about examples that might help make it even more clear. This is not the easiest stuff to talk about. I wish I could communicate it better, but I'm trying the best I can to communicate these things, because they're not easy. But boy, once you get it, once you see it, then you won't need all my words to describe it. You'll go, oh yes, that's what Jerry was talking about. And this whole area is what I'm talking about is pattern thinking, systems thinking, zoom out thinking, seeing the bigger picture thinking, thinking outside the box thinking, and process versus content thinking. Because we look at the process and not just the content. When we do this type of thinking, we step into an observer role and we step outside the interaction. We can learn to do that by doing it not live with the person, not in the moment, in the present. So as we're thinking about, I'm going to go to my, ex-husband's whatever situation, I'm already feeling anxious and uptight and reactive. And then you start to identify some of those processes in you. And I see could you please state the book and author again? James Framo. And it's entitled, I think I have it. Let's see if I have it on here. Explorations in Marriage and Family Therapy, I think, by James Framo, Framo. And so if we have, I'm going to go be with an ex, I'm going to go be with my family of origin, and I'm starting to get tense and anxious and all those kind of things are going on. And then we arrive and we're now caught up in all the mix. And it's much more difficult to Framo. it's much more difficult to be the observer. We're now intertwined and interacting with them, and it's more difficult to step outside. As you grow in self differentiation, and as you learn more, as you are coached more, as you learn more, you then can do it more in the moment. And you're able to go, wait a minute, I'm going to start being an observer right now. I'm not going to deal with my reactivity. I understand what my reactivity is about. I'm going to shut that off for now. I'm not going to focus on that. And I'm going to go observe what's going on between us. Rather than, and again, that's that going inward, I'm going to observe, and going outward, and I'm going to observe what's happening. What are they doing? What do I feel like doing? What do I feel they're causing me to do? And again, that's another good question of, we always think that they're causing me to do it. Well, they want you to do it, but I'm not sure they're causing you to feel that way. They want you to feel that way. We then will be triggered and feel that way. And the key in learning to achieve greater detachment and self-differentiation is learning to be this observer in the relationship. And that's good with friends. Take a relationship that's not so highly charged and start analyzing that relationship versus, real intense relationship, because we can have an awful lot of observational blindness with that. But take a more easy relationship, or even the relationship with the clerk down at the local, gas station, and how they treat you, and go, well, no, wait a minute, what's going on there, and how do I feel when that happens, and what would be a mature adult way to respond to them? For someone had mentioned something about James Framo book. It may be out of print, but you can, I think, find some copies on Amazon that are older. There might be some around, or interlibrary loan, but it was a classic in marriage and family therapy, and it was a very good one. Again, it was written primarily for therapists, but all of the principles were the same. When I think about a systems, I try to put an imagery to my systems thinking about relationships. So let's say I've got a friend that I'm not sure, I feel kind of weird about it, or it's kind of uncomfortable, or I feel reactive. And then I go, well, if I put it into a form of a tennis court, that where is that person, where is he on the tennis court, where am I on the tennis court on my side, where is he on his side, where are we in relation to the net, and how do we play this game together? Is he playing my part, am I playing his part? And I try to think about relationships and say, using that kind of a model. So I use a tennis court type of model, and you can do that for marriages as well. Where's my husband? Where's my wife on the other side? Where am I? Are we right up together against the net? Are they over here on our side? And I think many times what will happen is we'll be on our side of the net. And let's say we have a narcissistic spouse. Well, guess what? They may be all the way over here on our side, trying to direct how we hit the ball over here, because they're controlling, non-empathetic, and those kinds of dynamics. And they're not over there in a self-differentiated way. They're over here in a fused way with us. Or if we're needy, and if we tend to enmesh from our family of origin, we might jump over to their side of the net and, oh, let me help you, let me love you, it's okay if you mistreat me, I'll probably I hope I get some love from you, and then we're clear over here on their side of the net. Rather than having a healthy relationship, which is one on one side, one on the other side, and how are we playing the game of tennis? And so that's just a mental visual picture that I will use. There are other kind of pictures I use, but that's one of them. When we're thinking about systems and what role we play in the system, in the relationship system, we ask systems questions. And a lot of times people don't ask systems questions. We don't ask of that as much in our own recovery. Our therapists don't ask systems questions. I remember when I was doing inpatient alcohol and drug abuse treatment and dealing, and I was the family therapist for the treatment. And the we did use some family systems in that training and teaching and lecturing. For example, like family roles. And if you use family roles, the mascot, the lost child, the golden child, scapegoat, the addict, the codependent, and you have, all those different roles, then people start thinking, oh, you mean we all play these roles around this addiction? Yes. And it was very eye-opening to them. And because you're presenting a family systems approach to this illness. And they're able to see their own roles better, what roles other people play, and what's being asked of you and what's being asked of them. And so we ask some systems questions. What is my part in the relationship? What role do I play in this relationship or difficult relationship I'm having with this person, whomever it might be, mother, father, sister, brother, friends? And I think that's a good question. What role does the net play the role of an adult self? Well, I think the whole court plays the role of an adult self. And I want to be an adult self here, and I wish them to be an adult self over here. Now, I can't control them, but I can control me. And if I'm over the net on their side, if I've allowed them to come over the net on my side, I have to control me and be the adult self. That separateness in the middle is appropriate, mature detachment. It's appropriate, mature separation that we need in our relationships. Intimacy cannot be practiced without distance. I'll let you think on that a moment. Intimacy cannot be practiced without distance or without separation or detachment. Because if there is no detachment, how do you be intimate? Then they're not them and you're not you. How are you going to be intimate? You're just a glob. You're 50% you, 50% them. Now you're 100%, but neither of you are 100%. So how are you going to be intimate? It takes 100 to be intimate. And so we want to work towards that. So we ask the question, what part do I play? What's my role? And whenever I get into a difficult situation, I will usually ask that question. What role do I play in this problem? And that what part do I play in that? Now, it doesn't mean they're behaving well. Maybe I'm not behaving well either. But how do I keep this problem going? Let's talk about the simple problem of argument. And even with a narcissist, if you have an ongoing narcissistic relationship where you're arguing all the time, then there's two people involved in that. The narcissist is keeping the arguing going, and you are too. So you are playing a role in that dysfunctional pattern. And so, well, my role is I keep the argument going. And of course, oftentimes to no good end. I mean, it doesn't usually end well if things get resolved. So we want to stop our role in that dynamic. And here's an interesting thing about what happens if you stop your role. If you stop your role, then you have to start looking at other things. You have to see it differently. Okay, if I'm not going to argue with my narcissistic husband every day, what am I going to be thinking about? What am I going to be doing? What would I be doing? How would I be taking care of myself? Should I be in this relationship? Should we be together? it starts opening up those other beliefs, um, and the beliefs and awareness when we stop that. Many times I've asked people, they say, every time I'm around my parents, all I do is feel guilty. Okay, then let's imagine you not feeling guilty. It's all gone. You have no guilt. What would you be doing? What would you be doing with their relationship? How would you interact with them? How often would you want to interact with them? Oh, I haven't even been thinking about all those questions. Those are more process questions, sometimes structural questions, but I hadn't thought about all that. I've just been focusing on, I go see them, they make me feel guilty, I feel guilty, and I need to just get rid of this guilt, which then I don't do because I don't know how to do it. It doesn't go away. And I think looking outside the role is and seeing our role is a way to get more insight into a relationship. So, and also, what is their part? What is their role? Like parents who might be shaming or guilting. Well, what role does that play for them? How does that benefit them to do that? Now, you might say, well, they're just bad people. Well, they have issues, problems. My hunch is that shaming and guilting probably has been coming down through the generations for a while, would be my guess, and they've learned that. And also, it could keep them safe. In other words, it's difficult for them to be real, genuine, and authentic. And so it's important that we keep up the roles we had and keep those going. We're the ones who want you to stay connected to us, and so we'll do that through guilt and shame. Then you won't abandon us if we do that. What is their goal? What are they? What's in it for them to do the guilting and shaming? Now, again, I know we can't read people's minds, we can't, but oftentimes we know a lot more about the system than we even realize. We ask, what is my reactivity and what is my content? What am I trying to do and what am I trying to say versus what's my reactivity in this relationship system? What is their reactivity and what is their content? Because oftentimes, if you have a guilting or shaming parent, I'll just use that example, or spouse, oftentimes as their anxiety goes up, they become more shaming and guilting. Now, they're not going to tell you I feel more anxiety or more systems-related angst. They're not going to tell you that. They're just going to act it out in shaming and guilting. And that can give us some insight into their what might be behind the benefits for them. And then certainly with the narcissist, their benefits are they can't take criticism, they don't have empathy, they don't have the insight they need. So whenever you do insight or trigger their shaming, they will shame shed. Power, they will draw power from others like a tractor beam and do those kinds of things. So they have their other motives and their other unconscious needs in terms of why they're doing what they're doing. Well, we can either play into that or we can choose we need to look outside of that. So we want to learn to examine the process going on, not just the content being said and done. The simple example I've used in the past is like my son who was young, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, I forget how old he was. And he wanted to go to Tommy's. I think I've mentioned that in a video before. And he wanted to go to Tommy's. It was 9 o'clock on, say, a weeknight, Tuesday night, let's say. Well, school is tomorrow. I'm not going to let you go over to Tommy's at 9 o'clock at night and you have school tomorrow. No, we're not going to do that. Then he throws a fit because he wants to go and it's only right for him to go. And I'm the worst dad in the world. And why does he have to deal with the parents he has to deal with? And so I can either respond to the content, which is say, no, I'm not the worst dad. You have a lot more benefits than you think. I'm a good dad. Just look what I did the other day. I want you to stop being so upset. You're upsetting me. That's all reacting to the content. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is he would like me to change back and let him go to Tommy's. And all of these other things are a ruse. They're just a sleight of hand. I'm going to tell dad he's the worst dad in the world. Then maybe he'll feel guilty and let me go. So then my response is, in becoming aware of what the process is, then he says, Dad, you're the worst dad in the world. And I go, you're probably right. Well, can I go to Tommy's? No. Well, Dad, I don't think it's right that I have such horrible parents. Andrew, you are right that it's awful that you have such horrible parents who would not let you go. And so that's where I'm responding to the process rather than responding to the content. And that's what systems thinking can help us do. Okay. So with looking at the system or at the process is very powerful. And I'm going to give you a couple more examples here in a second. As we begin to see that process, we can begin to see the flow of impulses and the flow of the hot potato of anxiety. Actually, as you get better and better at seeing systems, you can go to a family gathering and actually watch the anxiety move around the room. I know that may sound kind of spooky, but you can actually see these people are tense over here. It starts to affect these people, which goes to those people, which comes back over to these people, and then guess what could happen? I now have a mother who's very attuned to all of that, and I'm not, well, I'll come back to that. So now I have a mother, let's say I'm using a mother, and now she starts guilting me about something. Well, the anxiety started over here, and it moved all the way through the family around to me. And as you begin to see those things happen more readily, you go, oh, I see what's going on here. Or if so-and-so's angry, who does it impact? Who does it not impact? Who does it impact? Who can detach from it? Who doesn't detach from it? And you can actually see that act out in front of you. We also can ask the questions, what's their point of view? What's my point of view around this issue? And then certainly we ask, what is the role of this interaction in the process, in the system? What role does this play? What does my emotional state play? How does it play out in this system? Because I'm not angry just for no reason. Probably if I'm angry, how does it serve this system in some way, especially a dysfunctional system? If I have low self-esteem, and again, we'll get to an example here, we can also ask, what is my inner adult thinking? What is my inner adult feeling? What is my inner child thinking? What is my inner child feeling? That also can give you insight into what's going on in the system, if you can be in touch with those. And so then we learn more about how we're pinging off of each other. Let me give you a very classic example. And I remember one of the earliest examples. I remember when I started out as a therapist many years ago. And back when I had a little bit of hair, and I was working with a couple, and they brought their teenager to me. It was a girl. She was probably like, I don't know, 13, 12, 13, something in that neighborhood. And they said, our daughter just got in trouble for shoplifting. We'd like you to treat her, fix her, get her straightened out. Oh, okay. Well, let me see what's going on. We don't want her in trouble. We don't know, I don't know what the reasons or causes are for at this point. And so I began to work with her, and I began to ask her more about, well, I'll call her Betty. Betty, how do your parents get along? How's their marriage in your opinion? Oh, it's awful. All they ever do is argue. All they ever do is shout and yell at each other. Um, I said, really? I said, does that ever bother you? Oh, I dread being at home. I dread going home. It's a horrible experience. Oh, okay. And when did you start shoplifting? When did that happen? Well, the first time was about 6 weeks ago. The first time was about 6 weeks ago. And I said, well, did anything happen 6 weeks ago? Yeah, Dad and Mom got into it because Dad had an affair. Really? Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And then I began to think more and more. She wasn't shoplifting before this. This wasn't, how do you feel about shoplifting? Do you know why you were shoplifting? And again, many times when people shoplift, there are shoplifters who go to just try to rob people. There are shoplifters who shoplift neurotically, but they have the money to pay for it. In fact, there was a woman on my block growing up. She worked at the bank. She was a head banking uh, person at the bank locally, and she was arrested for shoplifting. She has plenty of money. They had a wonderful house. They had all the resources they needed. Why is she shoplifting? That's and she was in her middle ages, and I'm going, well, that's not. And in her purse, she had all the money she needed to buy those things that she shoplifted. There's something else going on. It wasn't just about getting those things. And many times people say, I don't know why I did that. Because it's a system dynamic. And then I can go into the reasons why I think she actually did shoplift. But going back to the girl and her example, I think what was happening is the daughter is carrying the functions of the parents and being bad to get their focus off their bad marriage, and also to get them more unified about her as a problem. And that would bring her mom and dad together more. Now, she didn't think all that through. That wasn't on her mind. She's not aware of that. Parents aren't aware of that. And, but interestingly enough, as those parents, then I advise, you guys really are going to have to get some help for you if you're going to help your daughter, because this is a family issue. This is a system issue. And as the parents began to get better, well, guess what? Daughter's not shoplifting. And that goes away. It played a it played a role in that family system. Here's a question. I have extreme narcissistic parents. Got divorced very violently 41 years ago. I recently realized I have and react narcissistically to something of my pain and role models. So you react narcissistically through your pain or in your pain, and role models. I'm not sure what, and it's very painful. How can I unlearn? well, and I think those, if you're talking about unlearning reactivity, I think that's very important. And first of all, we want to take a look and see if we have CPTSD, because we're going to constantly have that shutting down, that reactivity that occurs with the result of PTSD and CPTSD. If we had narcissistic parents, that's going to engage a lot of things that we will be doing in terms of reactivity. So we want to deal with our CPTSD and begin the process of self-love and self-care. Um, and so we want to deal with that pain. It's very important that we deal with the pain. And this questioner asks, how can I unlearn? And that unlearning comes in dealing with that pain, resolving those painful experiences you had growing up or with your parents, and then also discovering and working through new patterns of of responding to other people and role models, I guess, and that we respond differently and begin to respond differently. I think we can be coached and learn how to do that with, and in fact, there are, again, good books in thinking about that. Not only the inner child books and the inner adult books like Taming the Outer Child, The Inner Child by Margaret Paul, but then also the books that are family systems oriented. This is our inward pain over here, and this is the system awareness. If you put both those together, you've got a really aware, conscious, mature adult. Inner child, inner adult, and systems. Jenny Brown, Growing Yourself Up. Roberta Gilbert, Harriet Lerner, Lerner. Those are some good books, and when you put them together, you really have a lot to process, and you find yourself gaining more freedom, and you begin to see how you are reframing and reigniting your brain to unlearn those things and to learn new things. So I hope that's a help with that question. I wanted to give another example of, this is again a simple one. I remember my mom sometimes, and again, she had good qualities and she had not so good qualities, which is true for most of our parents. Now, some of them are really toxic or cluster B, and some are not. The mom would quite frequently enmesh with me, become over involved with me, and would jump over the net over onto my side of the tennis net and be all involved with, how did you sleep? How much money are you making? Have you had a haircut? Jerry, you're gaining weight. It was just all that obsession about me. And mom would obsess about other siblings too. And I remember an example when she was older and we were talking and actually have a pretty good conversation. And she just up and stops. And it's like, I don't even, why are we stopping this conversation? Though I think I have some hint that she stopped the conversation and said, gosh, Jerry, your hair looks so awful. I just hate for you to go outside looking like that. Because my hair was a little long. I do grow hair longer in the back. And I didn't need a haircut. And I was trying to get a haircut, never could get in. So, but she makes that comment. I then feel the trigger of either shame or guilt, and I'm going, ooh, I haven't felt that in a minute. And I'm going, hold on. And again, having done some practice in that area and asking what's going on right now, I could then say, well, Mom, I don't know why you just interrupted a good conversation we had to talk about my hair. I think I'm 60 some years old. I think I can manage my hair pretty well. been doing that for quite a while. Maybe not to your standards, but it may bother you, but it doesn't bother me. Um, and that it also felt kind of rude that, interrupted right when we were talking and having a good conversation. And also you're raising a topic that I really don't want to discuss. So I would then want to set a boundary and say, I don't bring up and don't discuss my weight, my hair, those kinds of things, because I don't want to discuss those. You can discuss them with anybody you want. You can believe whatever you want, that's fine. You can think my hair looks awful. The And that I look horrible out there in front of people. Though I think there may have been some concern she might have for how she would look if I have hair that's not cut, and how that might reflect on her parenting. And many times parents will feel that and say, I don't want anybody. Now, they're not going to say that. They're just going to, well, you're looking overweight. Well, does it embarrass you that I look overweight to other people and they'll wonder what kind of a mom or a dad you are? And of course they say, oh, no, 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 no. Well, that may not be the case. And so one of the things in that system of what's going on, I think we were having a pleasant conversation. We were actually getting closer in that moment. Her systemic anxiety goes up, and then she has to manage the intimacy with this comment. So as we're starting to move in this way, she goes, oops, I'm starting to feel anxious and uncomfortable. So now I need to push Jerry back. Your hair, Jerry. Da, 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 da. I'm because otherwise, what's the sense of it? Because it serves a purpose in our relationship. It helps regulate our relationship for her. And so I can just say, I don't want to talk about that. Please don't bring that up again. And if you do, I will leave. So you're free to bring it up again, but I won't be staying for the conversation. So that's a boundary that I have. Even like shame in my own family. Things were not openly discussed in my family, as with many family. Feelings were not valued. You didn't talk about those kinds of things. There was lots of anxiety and shame throughout the family, even other generations when I was growing up. I heard stories my mom told me that now when I think back on them, I'm going, oh boy, this has gone back quite a ways. There was some shaming and some physical abuse. I didn't feel I was doing something bad growing up, but that I was bad. Of course, I could also add, I also felt I was doing things bad because I had both guilt and shame. What I was doing was the guilt. Who I am was the shame, and how bad I am shame-wise. Now, I can take a linear approach, which is the non-systems approach. A causes B causes C. That's just a straight linear approach rather than the system interplay of the flow of the emotional dynamics that's going on between us. I can take that linear approach, as many do, and just say, well, I blame my family for shaming me or abuse. They did it, and now I feel bad. And that's all there's to it. I need to just go get the shame or the guilt out of me. Okay, well, that's not a bad thing to think. It's just not all there is to think. It's not a bad thing, but it's just not all there is to think. Or I can look through the lens of a systems approach. For several generations, there was shaming and abuse, criticism, denial of feelings. And that as I begin to see from a top of the stadium versus down where the players are playing, I can begin to see and get more detachment from that. This has been a long-standing pattern. And so this is what's been going on for a long time. And how can I regulate me to handle that family dynamic? What do I need to do to self-regulate? Self-awareness, self-definition, self-regulation, And those are some things in a recent workshop we talked about, which, by the way, I did put up the workshop on my website that you can go and purchase that workshop and have a 4-hour workshop that I did on the introduction to self-differentiation. But looking at self-awareness, self-definition, and self-regulation. And so if I have this pattern of shame and stuff that's coming down to me, how do I, what do I need to become aware of in terms of what's going on in me? How do I need to define myself? What do I believe? What do I think is right? What boundaries are appropriate? And then self-awareness, self-definition, what do I believe? And self-regulation. Okay, I need to begin to work on regulating my own feelings, my own thoughts as I interact with them or have some interaction with them. And I think we can learn to do all three. All three are possible. And, they would shame me, so I would feel guilt and shame. How does it fit in the system? Well, then it wouldn't create problems that they didn't want to deal with. Many times we will be shamed and guilted, so parents don't have to deal with problems they don't want to deal with. It might challenge family secrets, so shaming and guilting will be instituted, or challenge their lack of self-esteem or self-worth, or choose to detach from the family, which would create abandonment feelings and fears. They don't want me to be separate from them, so shame and guilt keeps me connected because they don't want to be abandoned. Then it sets up a whole abandonment issue for me. Growing up was encouraged, some encouraged in my family, but only through the lens of the family system, only through the lens of how the family super self. You can grow up, but you have to grow up this way and with this understanding, with this awareness, with this definition, and with this way of regulating yourself. Then you can grow up that way. And if you divert from that, then we're going to have issues. And then we can learn to self-differentiate and begin to tackle those issues and begin to be our true selves rather than just the family self that we've been taught. And we also had in our family, no one should be too successful or too big for their britches, because then they'll be selfish, they'll be this, they'll be that. And they may have, just share the misery and negative view of the world in a family. That's just what we do. And I think it can be useful even to take the approach of writing down, what were your family rules? What were the ones that were spoken and what were the ones that were unspoken? What are the unwritten rules of your family? What are the written rules of that's very clear from your family? Because we have both. And there's a lot, you can begin to help become your own person. And that's a part of self-awareness, also a part of self-definition, for me to know what are the rules of the road here. What did I what did I grow up learning? How did this family work? Because you can do the same thing with business as well. Businesses have mission statements, vision statements. This is what we believe. When I worked at a hospital, and I used this, and we actually used it in orientation, what I did is go through all of the vision and beliefs that the system has, and then I added all of the unwritten ones. And it was very insightful and people felt very helped by the real rule, and the real belief is this. Because you can say, we value our associates, we love our associates, you all should love each other. And then they would be abusive, or they would be not empathetic to, there's two different rules. Here's the spoken one. What's the unspoken one? We'll love you and value you as long as you don't challenge the system. Then that's the real unspoken. That's the real unspoken rule that we live by. Families have the same thing. Rules, overt rules and covert rules. Um, Also, with my family growing up, I also would then end up needing them for acceptance and love because I had that not instilled in there. So I would keep needing that acceptance and love and always yearning and looking for that. And that keeps me enmeshed in the family system. Shaming will do that, guilting will do that, abuse will do that. And we end up then always needing and looking for acceptance and love. So what role does your blaming, your pain, your resentment, your hurt, your low self-esteem play in your family? Your immediate family, nuclear family, and your family of origin. Another way to think about freeing yourself from those, if you could magically wave a magic wand, repetitive here, and remove these, what would you be doing? How would you act in the relationship? If I didn't blame, and I many times asked for people to, okay, what I want you to do is stop blaming, and you no longer could blame them anymore. That's all done. Now tell me, how does that feel? What are you thinking? And what do you think you might be doing if you didn't have that? Ooh, then a whole host of things come up for them. Well, I've never even thought about not. If we took away that you were no longer the scapegoat, I'm going to wave the magic wand and use that wand and wave it. Boom, you're no longer the scapegoat. You no longer see yourself as the scapegoat. You're not that. What would you do? Most of the time, you would end up being the true and genuine you. You would not be as reactive, and you would rise above the role and begin to have new avenues of how to regulate yourself, how to communicate that with others. And so how does my role as the scapegoated one, or the truth teller, or the one who's out there with the family secrets, or the one being ostracized, or being overly smothered, or how does it serve the family and its interactions and dynamics? And I think those are some good questions to begin to think about. I think I have a question here. Let me make sure I have. Is the strategy to turn off obsessive thoughts my mind tends to get stuck on automatic and replay after negative interactions with someone else? Is the strategy to turn off the obsessive thoughts of my mind? And I think certainly, here's another thing when you're talking about obsessive thoughts. You're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to go, well, I don't know what Jerry's talking about. Well, sometimes I don't know what I'm talking about. So when you think about obsessive thoughts, are obsessive thoughts, do they play a role in the system? Or do you have obsessive thoughts and you may have an anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive problems? Because obsessive thoughts can be there from abuse, from the way we've interacted in the system. And how are these obsessive thoughts keeping me connected to my role and to this relationship? What do we do in a narcissistic relationship? How many times do we obsess about the narcissist and how they're treating us, or what they've done, or what they've said? Oh, we just do that and do that and do that and do that. But what is the process? That's what I'm doing, but how is it serving the relationship? It keeps me bound, if not trauma bounded, treat me bonded to them, that I keep trying to work this out that which is unworkable outing. We can't work it out. And so we want to resist the obsessive thoughts, especially if we've had an interaction. If they've been automatic, we want to resist those and maybe take a look at what role do they play in our relationship. Obviously, if I disengage and move away from the relationship and I'm having these obsessive thoughts, it's the relationship living on past the moment. And how does that work in my relationship? Why do I need that relationship living on past our interaction? So that's something you might ask about or ask yourself. And here's a good question. What if you don't feel a trigger of shame when that is said? Oh, well, and again, a part of our self-differentiation work begins with self-awareness. And that's a very good question in that if we're not aware, and many times we're not, because we may not have the language for shame, we may not know where shame occurs inside of us. Is it here, 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 down here lower? Where do we experience shame? And what does shame feel like for us? So getting to know what shame feels like, so when we hear this, and oftentimes we become numb to it. I mean, somebody can even say, you're just you're just a stupid and ridiculous husband. You're just a stupid and worthless wife. And it doesn't even trigger anything. It doesn't even trigger anything. And we can have paralyzed feelings, numb feelings, and we don't even think of it as being shaming. Or we go to our family of origin and they go, it's just too bad that you just can't get your life together. I'm just wondering when you're going to do that. Shaming. And again, it's so routine, we may not even notice it. So we want to work on self-awareness because you're right, we might not feel that trigger of shame. And so learning feelings for ACOAs, ACONs, adult children of narcissists, adult children of alcoholics, we have to learn to begin to know our own feelings. And that's a very beginning process that we want to do so that we can be healthy and whole. Appreciate Mark allowing me to share with you tonight. I hope you gained something from tonight. Sometimes gaining one thing can be worth all of the talking that I do. If we can get one thing that's really important to us. And Mark, thank you. I appreciate getting to teach tonight. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a great day.